There are children that it's so important for us to come out the right way, who seem to ignore every word we're saying, or a friend who appears unmoved even though...
Welcome to Prism of Torah with Rebbe Saf Aaron Prisman, engaging Divrei Torah, packed with stories and practical insights. Find us wherever you get your podcasts or at prismoftorah.org.
Shalom Avracha. In this week's Parshas Chukas, we know it's packed with amazing messages, pshat, drash, and soid. I want to share with you an idea that is based on what I saw Moshe Feinstein writes, and I want to add to it something that seems so simple, yet it's such a deep and practical concept. We know that in the episode of Mei Meriva, the Bnei Yisrael were complaining to Moshe Rabbeinu, we're very thirsty, there's no water. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, there's a rock over here, I want you to speak to the rock, and that way water will come out. Moshe Rabbeinu on his level decided to hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. Whatever his cheshbon was on his level, probably something in the lines of, he thought there will be more Kiddush Hashem by doing it such a way. And as a result, he paid a very heavy price and he wasn't allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael. Question number one that Moshe Feinstein asks is the following. What's the big deal? It would have been a miracle no matter what, whether Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the rock or hit the rock. So why was he punished so severely? And I want to add to this question. Why in the first place did Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu ensure that he commanded to speak to the rock as opposed to hit the rock? Why is it such a big deal? What's the difference? What's the fundamental difference between speaking to the rock and striking the rock? I want to add my own question, which is, why was the commandment to do something with the rock? Why not any other object? Of course, the answer to the first question on a pshat level, HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished Moshe Rabbeinu because on his level, he didn't listen to Hashem's commandment, which was to speak to the rock. But what about the other two questions we asked? So we'll start off with Moshe Feinstein's answer in Drush Moshe. He says that the reason Hashem specifically requested that Moshe Rabbeinu should speak to the rock is to teach us the following message, a moradike idea. He says, sometimes we feel we're talking to rocks. There are children that it's so important for us to come out the right way, who seem to ignore every word we're saying, or a friend who appears unmoved, even though we really care about them, and we're talking to them, we're saying, we pour our hearts out to them, and nothing. We see no results. Perhaps, says Moshe Feinstein, the Torah is teaching us through this commandment, don't give up. You have no idea when the seed that you are planting, and I want to add, especially when you're doing it in a consistently manner, will eventually blossom. Even a rock was able to produce water when Hashem spoke to it through Moshe Rabbeinu. Kal v'chomer, a person, a human soul that can be impacted by words, even though you do not see the results immediately. You should not give up. And of course, you should say it in the right way, in a nice way, in a positive environment, etc. That's obvious. I would like to take this a step further. Building on this foundation, I think there's another layer. We can also ask, why did Hashem specifically choose a rock? And it's very interesting that water came out of the rock. The Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, teaches that a rock represents the Yetzer Hara, while water symbolizes Torah. And more than that, water is able to melt the rock. Hence, I think that this wasn't random. HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated the scene to be that there will be water coming out of the rock through speaking, to show that the speaking will eventually have an effect. Torah and words that can give chizuk spiritually to people can penetrate even the hardest spiritual resistance. And I want to add to that, only through consistency, not through force. If you ever see a rock where people walked over it over and over and over again, eventually you see there's an effect over many, many decades. So too with a drop of water. It can make its carving effect on a rock. This is exactly what Rabbi Akiva saw. Rabbi Akiva saw that a rock, even a rock, can be eventually penetrated by water. And hence, Torah, which is like water, symbolized by water, can penetrate even my heart that's like made of rock. And I want to add something else that one of my chavrusas told me, Reb Chanuch Davidman Shlita. And that is, it's very interesting. Each individual drop, when you look at it, you see zero effect. It seems negligible, leaving absolutely no visible trace. You could watch it for hours and nothing. But we all know that the effects of water, for good or for bad, if you have retivut at home, dampness, and the water can cause a lot of damage. Water is not measured, the success of the effects of water are not measured by the drop, but by the decades. Hence, to summarize this concept, even on rock, the most unchangeable substance, persistence can actually leave its impacts and create transformation. Torah works in the same way, as we know. And hence, a person should continuously, yes, say a good word to someone, try to affect them even though you see no results. The question a person should ask himself when he's trying to positively affect a friend or a child is not why aren't they changing, but it should be, am I still following? I would like to conclude with the following story that has to do with me as I witnessed this. And since I teach Daf Yomi already for many years, 5.5 years ago in Yerushalayim, Binyanei Ha'uma, I was on my way to Siyum Hashas in English. And as I approached the building and I went into Binyanei Ha'uma to be part, to participate in this huge Siyum, 5.5 years ago, I saw a tall, charismatic man stood at a small booth near the entrance. And he was screaming out with tons of energy. He looked very familiar to me. Later on, I realized he's from my hometown over here in Ramat Beit Shemesh. He says, 8 minutes a daf, 8 minutes a daf, Daf Yomi for our generation. I don't remember the exact words. 8 minutes a daf, I do remember. And he was giving out pamphlets to everyone that walked by. People took his pamphlets, in my opinion, or what seemed like to be, mostly to be polite. I also grabbed one. Didn't want to disappoint this enthusiastic stranger promoting yet another shir. He indeed was a Magid shir and started to teach in my hometown, Ramat Beit Shemesh Aleph, to what I understood, modest crowds. As Corona approached, attendance even dwindled a bit more. And at that point, it seemed that his dream of revolutionizing Daf Yomi would totally fade out. From friends of mine that go to his shir, he was speaking very passionately. You could have thought there were thousands of people there. But it almost looked like he was speaking to stone, as our Dvar Torah that we just said. Then something shifted. It was actually through Corona that he had to think of all kinds of ways of sending out his material to others through video technology, and a lot of hours that he dedicated to this huge project. His 8-minute daf began reaching people stuck at home. Behind the scenes, there was a full team he put together, graphic designers, video editors, researchers, finding the cool ideas within the daf. And the same voice that once echoed in near empty rooms now reached tens of thousands daily. And he even created his own building now. I think it's called MDY, where he gives 2 shiurim daily, one in Hebrew, one in English, and they had lots of people coming, and it's also streamed videoly. And I think the beautiful part about this, he doesn't even need the 8-minute daf slogan anymore. People are so hooked, they happily listen for an hour, and his shiurim are for an hour. From what I understood, and I didn't double check this, but someone told me that yesterday, literally yesterday or 2 days ago, he was on the famous show, Prime Time 60 Minutes. This persistent Magid shir appeared on 60 Minutes. And now he leads literally an empire. It's a whole institution he created dedicated to transforming how people learn Gemara, to give them all kinds of tools to help them, and they get into it. And there's all ages there, from old to the young. It's unbelievable. So you ask, who was the stranger at the booth who refused to give up? If you haven't guessed already, it's none other than Rabbi Eli Stefansky. Now, I think he's the most listened to Daf Yomi Magid shir in the world. And then I want to end with the following idea, which is the theme throughout this Dvar Torah. Sometimes the seeds you plant in stone just need time, faith, and perseverance, and patience, and then they bloom into forests. Have a good Shabbos.
This concludes another episode of the Prism of Torah. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something valuable. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and give a 5-star rating. You can also find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts or our own website, prismoftorah.com, where we have a full archive of all our past episodes. We would like to thank Yona Vefa for the recording equipment and Eli Podcast Productions for handling all our post-podcast productions. Join us next week for another enlightening conversation on the Prism of Torah.